Good day to you and welcome to Westchester Talk Radio. I'm John Marino and we are produced by Shark Creative. That is Shark with a C, not a K. Shark, S-H-A-R-C, Creative, and we are made possible by Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center. And they promise to keep us powered in Westchester and beyond right through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric. At Lipolis, you are never left in the dark. Park Sterling Realty, White Plains Hospital, Hightower Advisors, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard, and Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon. Check out our entire podcast series, if you would, on our YouTube channel at sharkcreative.com. Now, we are joined by here as we bring to you another episode of On the Beat in Westchester here on Westchester Talk Radio with Journal News and LoHud.com investigative reporter, our good friend, Mark Lungariello. Mark, welcome back as we are now partially reopened in Westchester. We'll go straight to the point. How's it going?
John, what's interesting and maybe a little bit scary about the reopening process is we won't really know until we're into the next stage. And what I mean by that, not to be ominous, is if efforts to, limit the spread of the coronavirus are effective, we won't really know until a few weeks out. But so far, so good. And I think everybody, particularly at this time of the year when the weather's nice, everybody is itching to get outdoors and kind of try to get back to business as usual to the extent that we're even able to.
Patient zero was in New Rochelle about 3 months ago. Now New Rochelle seemingly has 0 cases. Are we on the mark with that? That's the last I heard.
Well, again, when we talk about actual documented cases, it's confirmed cases by the state and, of course, active cases. So these are all estimates, John. The thing about the virus from the very get-go was that there may be people that are asymptomatic that are carrying the virus. So when we talk about confirmed cases, we're talking about people that have tested positive. We're also talking about hospitalizations, that sort of thing. I mean, the direction from early on was don't go to the hospital unless it's absolutely necessary. So, yes, but yeah, the numbers have been trending down, and it changes from day to day, but it's looking promising in New Rochelle and otherwise for sure.
Mm-hmm. And around the entire county too. The sense you get from public officials like, say, County Executive George Latimer, does it seem like with him, for example, that all systems should be go pretty soon? Again, we are in a partial reopening, and of course, this happens step by step.
Yes, when we talk about getting back to normal or turning the economy on, and I think if people go back to our previous episodes, they'll probably hear me saying the same thing. I didn't coin the expression by any means, but it's not just flipping a switch back on, John. So what I mean by that is even once we're back and through all the phases, hopefully things go as planned, it won't be a back to normal situation. It's going to be a long time before society or the local economy resembles anything that we are used to. It's going to be reduced capacities in restaurants. It's going to be reduced capacities in stores. It's still going to be a lot of that, limiting how many people could come and go. Grocery stores, one aisle, and each aisle one direction only. And masks. Masks are going, and gloves in a lot of ways will be part of the routine for a very long time. There's no vaccination. There's still no accepted method of treatment for the virus. So as long as it still exists, unless we get that number of cases down to 0, which does not seem feasible, until that happens, it's going to be a different reality. Even if everything goes in the best case scenario, come September, we'll see schools in limited capacity or limited opening, even if they are open in any in-person capacity. So I do think that officials are optimistic that we're on track to go hit phase 2 next week. I do think if that goes well, a couple of weeks out, we'll be in phase 3, but it still won't be the way things were in January or February of 2020.
Health officials around the county, the health department, et cetera, I know they're monitoring, obviously, things very closely. Is this something that until we get a vaccine that unfortunately we'll have to live this way until then? Not only a vaccine, but a vaccine that we know works.
Yes, yeah, I would definitely say that. And I think that one thing that's kind of almost gotten to the back pages, obviously, with all of the civil unrest about the, racial injustice and the George Floyd situation. And of course, all the reopening talks and economic talks when it comes to the coronavirus is testing capacity. That was the original discussion, if you recall. We did not have the ability to test people to the extent that they needed to. One aspect I think people really are going to need to get used to is your temperature getting taken before you go into buildings. And when you do go back to the office, if you work a more traditional office job, you may be tested for the coronavirus. It may be antibody testing, and it may be COVID-19 tests, and you may be tested multiple times. Why? Because when they're really trying to contain the virus, they were able to slow the initial spread. But now the question is, what do they do from here? Well, whenever there's a confirmed case, they're going to be doing contact tracing. You see that they've been hiring people and trying to track it so that any future outbreak or second wave or third wave or minor wave here or minor wave there doesn't turn into some huge outbreak where another shutdown is entirely less necessary. You may be shutting down this community or that community where there's a quote-unquote hot spot, but the idea is that if you have the testing capacity that you need, you don't need to shut down everybody as a precautionary measure. You'll have a better understanding of where the virus is active and where people with the virus are active. So you could see, and I hate to name a particular community, so we'll just call it Community X. Community X has, a number of cases, and you're able to see where that person who tests positive, who they've interacted with, and you test their, place of business or employment, their building, their neighborhood, and you're able to isolate generally geographically where that outbreak is happening. So I think that's an important thing. I think we need to get used to not just masks and gloves and limited capacity, but we need to start to get used to testing and sanitizing facilities as part of the deal as well.
Not only testing, but maybe working instead of 18 people on an office floor, on an office area together, you might have 6 at a time spread out pretty far, more than 6 feet even. And I think companies are going to go even safer than that. If you say 6 feet, they might make it 8, 10, 12, just to be safe, just to be sure. And we might have to get used to maybe one person at a time going up an elevator. If the building has, say, 6 elevators, you might have 6 people going up at the same time. 6 people coming down at the same time. You could have 30 people on a line, but you'll have to wait it out, maybe get to work real early. That is, if you go to work, you'll have maybe shifting at work. Maybe if you worked 9 to 5 before, you might work, say, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. or half a day at work. And we'll have to get used to, like we're doing now the last 3 months or so, much of our work, if not all of our work, for many people at home.
Yes, yeah. Particularly a lot of the office-bound jobs in Manhattan, no one's in a real rush to reopen that. And frankly, like you said, when they do, I think it'll look very differently. Let's take a look at colleges, universities. They are already implementing what I think is you're going to see in a lot of other more office-bound jobs, right? Which is going to be that it's going to be a hybrid, right? So what the colleges are talking about, and a lot of are already implementing, is they don't want to eliminate in-person instruction. But what are they doing? They have someone come in. It'll be, instead of let's just call it a 30-person class, instead of a 30-person class, they stagger the schedule. There are 2 sections of that class, so it'll be 15 people in the class. There'll be empty desks in between. Or maybe instead of, if you have a class that's meeting a couple of times a week, maybe you're only meeting 1 time a week. This way you limit the amount of people that have to come in and out of the classroom. You limit the need for, everybody to pack in together. Because another thing, you mentioned the 6 feet. 6 feet is a number that, health experts have said, but it's basically just a guidance. It's not like there's a force field at the 6 foot mark that the virus doesn't travel beyond the 6 feet.
And if I were running a company, I use this example like that about going more than 6 feet. That's what I would do to protect my company. If you or I were in the same office together, I might be here, and I'd say, "Hey, Mark, my closet over here to the left, about 10 feet away. Sit there."
Yes, and one thing that we are learning a lot more as we start to learn a little bit about the virus, and that's something that I think is very important, that health experts are kind of learning about it as it's happening. We're seeing this real-time study as the pandemic breaks out. Is dosage. Let's talk about dosage here, because if you're sitting next to someone who has the coronavirus and you're sharing the same air as them, and you're sitting in an enclosed space with them over an 8-hour workday, you're getting a lot of those particles of the virus breathed into your system. Whereas if you pass somebody as you're going for a walk down your street, you may even breathe in some of that virus, but it'll be such a small dosage of the virus that it doesn't have any, let's say, deadly effect or even really serious effect. So when you're talking about reopening business, I think that's an important factor too. It's not just a matter of contracting the virus in every level. There's also concern about dosage, and the closer that you are, the higher risk of higher dosage that you get.
Okay, so you talk about college classes, university classes maybe being done in shifts. Does this lead to a labor issue where a teacher, professor says, "Well, I taught everybody all at once in one class for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours a week. Now you want me to do 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening and half the class size each one. Throw me something for it." Interesting, huh?
It may, and John, I'll give you full disclosure. I'm an adjunct instructor, and this last.
That's why I throw it up there too, knowing things you do.
Yeah, so the transfer, unanticipated mostly. Not to say there were no preparations once the outbreak happened. We knew it could happen, but to totally transfer your curriculum and your syllabus from in-person instruction and with the expectation that students will be interacting with one another to teaching virtually and having a conversation like you and I are having right now. It adds quite a bit of work, and there's also an issue of well-being and isolation. So I definitely think faculty are working harder, and I'm not just talking about on the higher education level. That's an issue, I think, through all levels of education, and how that's going to play out in, say, public schools and public education and future contracts. That's going to be interesting, but I do think there's going to be a question there, and you're going to have this two opposing things happening. You're going to have the instructors maybe thinking that they're putting in more time and should be compensated differently, and on the other hand, you have students that have not been living on campus or getting that aspect. So colleges may be getting less income or less tuition, or people deferring their education until the virus outbreak is contained or to some satisfactory level. So you might get colleges getting less income and maybe considering spending more. It's going to be a long-term problem and a long-term discussion, I think, not just on university level and public education as well.
Westchester Talk Radio. I'm John Marino. Shark Creative produces us, and we are here with Mark Lungariello, investigative reporter, Journal News, LoHud.com, on the beat in Westchester. And Mark, where do you teach? What have you been teaching? And give us a little bit of that background as to the way things have transitioned in the last few months. You've been teaching from at home, I assume, from what I know. How much of a transition has that been for you and your teaching colleagues?
I can't speak for my colleagues, frankly, because the experience is very different depending on what you're teaching. What do I teach? I teach journalism and introductory.
As I assume.
Introductory journalism class in Manhattanville College, and basically
in Purchase, correct? Manhattanville College in Purchase, right?
Manhattanville College in Purchase, right? So how does it change it? I mean, when you're talking about a journalism class, a lot of the interaction of journalism is reporting. And when you're teaching someone reporting, the expectation is they're going to have interactions with people that they're interviewing. We talk about interview skills. We talk about going up to people, what's often called person on the street interviews, where you just, in the old days, you might just hang out on the street corner or in front of the grocery store and try to...
And harass people, like we do, right?
That's your way of putting it. But yes, go up to people cold that you don't know and say, hi, I'm from, the Shark Creative. I'm from the Journal News, and I'm looking for people to speak to me about XYZ. And all of a sudden, your students aren't able to do that. And all of a sudden, your students can't do person on the street interviews. They can't go into a public place to interview anybody. And suddenly, they're assigned, to write articles to say, hey, profile someone. And suddenly, the hope is that they profile someone that they don't know. Suddenly, they're isolated in their living room in a different part of the country. I had students as far as Brazil. And how can they do reporting based in New York remotely, particularly if, when I say, let's do a profile, for example. Hey, spend a lot of time with that person. You literally can't spend any time with that person physically. So a lot of people end up having to modify the assignment. And also, one last thing I'll say, at the risk of going on another babbling fest here, is that,
No, we want you to tell all. That's why we have you.
Yeah, well, thanks. But so I'm losing my train of thought there. But you start to have people not only interviewing people that they know, but the coronavirus itself has become such a big story. How can you not incorporate that into your syllabus? Not to mention, students are terribly distracted with their own anxiety, feelings of isolation, sent home, family members who may have contracted the virus, and all that other kind of stuff.
And the social justice issue now, too, after the George Floyd tragedy in Minneapolis, that too.
That's right. I mean, a lot of the George Floyd situation has hit, in the last couple of weeks since my semester has been over. So we haven't really dealt with that in class. But the coronavirus itself is a social justice issue because for underlying probably healthcare reasons, the virus has largely affected people of color, at least on the level of it being deadly. It has been most deadly to people of color. And that's an issue in and of itself. So there's so many different levels and, as we say in the journalism world, angles on that story. And suddenly you had not planned to have that as part of your course. And suddenly, people should be reading about that and reporting on that. And, I'll just tell you, John, as part of my syllabus, we added an assignment on the coronavirus. Write an article based on the coronavirus. So it just, how has anything in our lifetimes just become, dominated every conversation for such an extended period of time for 2 or 3 months, and it'll be something that we talk about for years to come. So, I don't even know that we could say the ultimate impacts on the way that you teach a course, the way that you learn a course, your taxes, your budget, your government. It'll just have impacts for years to come for sure.
Mark Lungariello, Journal News, LoHud.com. Let's talk about a hot mic issue. Right now, our mics are hot, mine and yours, because they are open. For those who don't understand what a hot microphone is, it's an open microphone, whether the person speaking on that mic or maybe someone not even speaking just happens to be hanging out around that microphone, doesn't know a microphone is on. Well, you got to watch what you say. Congressman Elliot Engel, was near an open mic, a hot mic, and maybe he didn't realize that microphone was open, that it was turned on?
Yeah, so Elliot Engel is facing serious primaries, particularly one of the more serious election challenges that he's had in it's 31 years that he's been in office.
And let's preface this by saying that this challenge came about from the AOC wing of the Democratic Party, who felt that Elliot was not as much in lockstep with their platform as they think he should be. They told him, shape up the way we want you to shape up. He didn't, and they said, Elliot, after all the good you've done for 30 plus years, this is your reward. We're going to run somebody against you.
Yes, well, to be fair, Elliot Engel did have, I think, 3 challengers in 2018, the last time he was up for election. But what's changed is after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, not only did they realize that they could win, but it really changed the argument of what they're able to accomplish. When I say they, I mean the progressive wing of the party is what I mean. And suddenly you had of interest again, but it was a different kind of interest this time. There was certainly that progressive energy come from the same cloth, if you will. 3 candidates running against Elliot Engel, but there's one who has particularly made a lot of the noise. That's Jamal Bowman, is a Yonkers resident and a Bronx high school principal, and backed by the same liberal group that helped get Ocasio-Cortez elected. So back to the hot mic issue. Elliot Engel's been taking a lot of heat because a lot of heat for the hot mic, you might say, but he was taking heat before that because he was spending time down in outside of Washington, D.C., has a home down there, and during the coronavirus outbreak from March until mid-May, the Atlantic magazine reported that he had been out of his district and spending time in his home outside of Washington, D.C. So his opponents really went after him for that, and he has now been, president of the district. By the way, his district is the 16th congressional district in Westchester, southern part of Westchester, and parts of the Bronx. And he's seen at a rally, I think it was in the Fordham section of the Bronx, with the Bronx Borough president. And the Bronx Borough president says that he'll introduce him. This was on the News 12 in the Bronx feed. Says, well, we'll introduce all the elected officials, but we won't have time to have everyone speak because there's so many people. And Elliot Engel is heard saying, I wouldn't care except that I have a primary challenge. And he even repeats himself. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if that's the exact quote, but I wouldn't care except that I have a primary. And he says it again. So again, he's taking a lot of heat from his opponents because of it. And what the long-term ramifications or impact are going to be on his reelection chances, I don't know. Elliot Engel still does have a lot of support, particularly a person who's been along that long. I don't know how much it's going to affect his reelection chances, and I think that there's one thing that really may protect Engel, which is the fact that he has 3 opponents. So the anti-incumbent vote, the progressive vote, the anti-Engel vote, it might be split up among 3 different candidates. One of the candidates did drop out of the race and is now supporting Mr. Bowman, but he will still appear on the ballot. So, how much that consolidates the anti-Engel vote remains to be seen. I guess we'll know on June 23rd.
Mm-hmm. Now, based on what he said, I wouldn't think it's a big deal. He's got somewhat of a point because he needs to get his message out as the incumbent, and having such a strong challenge from Jamal Bowman against him, I can understand his worry and his concern. Could that just be something any opponent might take and try to turn around against an opponent?
Against
who you might be running against. Let's say Bowman, for example, and the others who are running against Engel. It's just something for them to use against Elliot Engel.
Yes, well,
no matter what it is, they're going to look for anything to go back against him with, and this is seemingly innocent enough to me. He's got a valid point, and yet you take that if you're running for office and turn that back against the person you're running against.
Well, again, I can't speak for everybody because I don't know, how much it's going to affect Democratic voters in the district. But I can tell you on the limited conversations I've had, the reason why this is such an issue is this is like a profound racial injustice situation, protests all over the country. And this was a situation where there had even been some vandalism that had escalated out of the peaceful protests in that area. And they were holding this press conference calling for peaceful protests and that sort of thing. And him saying that he doesn't care is almost saying that, like, well, here's this like situation that's like probably the most, like I said, for lack of a better way of putting it, profound, widespread social unrest since the late 1960s, and he's saying that I don't care, that quote, how people take that. What some people may say, well, and again, this is based on a very limited conversation I've had with people, voters in the district, and some people out of the district as well, say, well, hey, he didn't mean that he didn't care about the movement or the protests. It just, may sound that way. I understand what he meant. Others may say, well, that shows you that he doesn't really care about the movement. He literally says that he doesn't care about the movement. Again, for lack of a better way of putting it, if he wears it, I just don't know. Will it shake people who were going to vote for him? Well, maybe some. I think the question is how many. There's at least one organization that has pulled its endorsement of Elliot Engel as a result of that. So,
and which organization was that? Do you know?
You know what? I don't know offhand, but I do know that they had endorsed him and pulled the endorsement yesterday. So, again,
context matters. That's what it comes down to.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's a matter of if you think that the quote. I mean, there's no doubt it was him saying it. There's no doubt that he said it. He came back afterwards and said, "Of course, I care about the situation." That's why I wanted to.
Right. I think it was more for him about the FaceTime, that he gets a lot of FaceTime anyway, and he understands that you might not be able to get to him regardless of what the issue might be. The real issue here being that he's running for re-election, and any incumbent wants every opportunity they can during an election season, an election cycle, to state their case about whatever issue it happens to be.
Yes, and of course, the other opponents that were running for office wouldn't have gotten equal time anyway. I mean, to be fair, Elliot Engel is in office, but there's the other side of that coin is that his opponents wouldn't have gotten the same opportunity to speak at that press conference, of course.
Mm-hmm. Mark Lungariello, Journal News, LoHud.com, investigative reporter on the beat in Westchester is our show. I'm John Marino, Westchester Talk Radio, WestchesterTalkRadio.com. Mark, shape up for us, detail for us the race for district attorney in Westchester.
The only countywide election, at least in primary season. Of course, there's the presidential election going on statewide. But this is a race to watch, John. There's no other way to put it. You have District Attorney Anthony Scarpino. He's seeking his second 4-year term in office. He's a long-time judge in the district, in the area, known in Westchester County. He's, been somebody that's been around the Democratic Party for years. And you have Mimi Rocha, who is a 16-year U.S. prosecutor, federal prosecutor, who a lot of people know from this time that she spent on MSNBC as a political analyst. So she's a social media presence that people are well aware of. They've seen her on television, and she's very popular among this new wave of suburban voters that we've had, groups like Indivisible, for example. She's very popular among them. So this isn't just a matter of we were talking about this AOC progressive movement. It's not just a matter of progressive versus not progressive when it comes to the Westchester County DA race. It's also a matter of in the party leadership. When they had a convention to nominate a candidate. Scarpino won, but it was about 51% of the vote, which is, telling when you talk about an incumbent, somebody that's in office, somebody that's been around the party that long, that it was in a weighted vote of party leadership that he narrowly, was endorsed. Mimi Rocha's gotten a lot of support from, I wouldn't say political name brands necessarily, but people that are in office on the local level, elected officials. So this is a race to watch. And I do think a lot of people think that there could be an upset there. And I call it an upset just because Anthony Scarpino is the incumbent. Under normal circumstances, maybe 2-3 years ago, before the way that people think about politics in the suburbs changed, I don't think you would have thought he was in danger. But Also, we just had a recent case of the Mount Vernon cop who had turned over tapes of alleged corruption to the DA, and he's been criticized for that a little bit. Law enforcement very much in the public eye now with George Floyd, some other issues that have come up, bail reform in New York State in recent years. So this is really a race to watch. The DA, a prosecutor race, is usually not one of the sexiest races, but this time for June 23rd on a presidential election year, turns out to be probably the one of the sexiest races to watch in Westchester County.
And I've always gone back to the Janine Pirro days, looked at DA in Westchester as something that is a very public profile job, because so many interesting cases happen in Westchester, so many cases, whether they be about criminal justice, whether they be about business, Wall Street issues, et cetera, what immigration, et cetera. The Westchester DA's office always seems to be, through the years, having to deal with issues that are not only local, cases like the Yonkers housing, years back, everybody involved with that. They turn out to be stories of national interest and importance, which leads to the question of what happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis. How much do you think could it play a significant role in this race?
I think it's a factor because inequity in prosecutions, it's always a discussion. And if anything, it's only amplified an existing debate within the office, right? What are they doing to, promote equity in prosecutions? What are they doing to track data? They just had a debate the other day, and Anthony Scarpino questioned a lot of the available data about demographics in terms of arrests and prosecutions and convictions. And he said he's been updating his system, but we don't know. So will we get an accurate picture? These are the kind of questions. Bail reform is another one. These are debate points that were happening anyway. And what's happened is that the Floyd situation has really thrust, I was going to say thrust it back into the national spotlight, but really amplified what was already an existing debate within the Westchester County DA race as it was.
Nita Lowey, in Congress since 1988, 32 years, 16 terms. Both of us have gotten to know her pretty well through the years. I remember meeting Nita before she was elected to office in the run-up to the election during the campaign in 1988 during my WFAS White Plains radio days. Nita, highly respected, carved out a legendary path through the years. She's represented through redistricting so many different areas around this New York tri-state area. In Westchester, I remember years ago, back in the 90s, a redistrict. She wound up 2 blocks away from me, her border in the Bronx and Pelham Bay section. She had the Throgs Neck section next door. She had the North Shore of Long Island. Now she has the White Plains area, White Plains, what we'll call metro area, and then her district juts across the Tappan Zee Bridge into Rockland County. I don't think anybody has represented more people around this tri-state area in history than Nita Lowey has. First of all, she'll be missed. And secondly, those are some pretty big shoes to fill.
Yes, it's interesting. I think that maybe some people in the area take for granted that she is one of the more influential members of the House on the Democratic side, an ally of Nancy Pelosi, an old friend of the Clintons, and a trailblazer, frankly, someone who, she's the first woman to head the House Appropriations Committee, which has, been in the news over the shutdowns and the standoffs with President Donald Trump since she was named to that position in 2018. So, you're going to have a huge change there. It's as much of a political name brand in this part of the country as you could get after, of course, the Westchester residents named Hillary and Bill. So there's a lot of people that have lined up and waited for a chance at that seat without the incumbent there. There are 7 candidates still running and 8 that'll appear on the Democratic Party ballot. One of them just dropped out recently. Catherine Parker, the county legislator, is no longer running, but she will still be on the ballot. So it's almost difficult to even go through the list of everybody that's going to be on the ballot. And I would say that, of course, is the race that another big race to watch in Westchester County. And what's interesting about that race is even the people that can't vote in that race are going to be watching it because, like you said, Nita Lowe's been such a fixture in local politics and in national politics even, that it's people are really watching to see who's going to, try to fill those shoes.
Mm-hmm. Who do you see as the lead Democratic candidate? Who the Republicans are running? And is this seat, would you call it to be safely in Democratic Party hands, no matter who the Democratic nominee, the winner of the primary might be?
Well, I think the first part was you asked me who do I think the front runner is among the Democrats or among the Republicans?
Let's say everybody, both parties. Who do you foresee in the end being the two who go head to head?
This is like everyone's favorite question to
I
me.
know.
There's, and I always say I'm not. My job isn't to predict or
Prognosticate. Who's leading
yes.
now? Maybe we should put it to you that way. Who's leading right now from what you see?
I can tell you that from campaigns and their internal polling, which I have not seen, but I've been told anecdotally about, and a lot of it done before the coronavirus. This could change, obviously, with advertising and different forums being held and everything else. But this is an election where you need only about 20% of the vote, less than that, as a matter of fact. That may change if you take Catherine Parker out of the equation. But a lot of the polling was showing that David Carlucci, the state senator, was ahead. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there are a lot of candidates on the Westchester side of the district. David Carlucci represents already a large number of people within the district.
Right, in that area right there, he represents. His district runs pretty much within Nita's district. It's almost identical.
Right. And
so voters know him as opposed to a Catherine Parker who comes from the other side of the county.
Yes, and State Assemblyman David Buchwald, he's from White Plains. He has a district, but the assembly is the lower house in the state legislature, and his district is much smaller, so it's a little bit different there. And
yeah, he's well known in that area too, David Buchwald.
Sure, but again, I think the argument is that his district's reach isn't as large as the Senate district's reaches, and also David Carlucci is one of only two candidates out of Rockland, the other being Mondaire Jones, who was running before Lowe even announced that she was retiring. He was running from the left as a progressive against Nita Lowe. So I think that's why you're seeing him in the polls. He maybe has like name recognition within the district, and some people expect that he may have a easier path to victory than some because of being on the Rockland side, well known, and like you said, already having an existing constituency there.
Name recognition or accomplishment? What matters more, or does the situation matter the most? For example, if you brought Donald Trump into that district to run, name recognition, you can't beat that. But what people think of Donald Trump in that district would matter more, I would think.
Yes, well, again, David Carlucci has an interesting situation in the sense that he was a member of the Independent Democratic Conference in the state Senate. That was the group of Democrats that broke from mainline Democrats in a power sharing agreement with Republicans.
Pseudo-Republicans or sellouts, depending upon who you talk to.
So all of the IDC members, former IDC members, faced primaries in 2018, and all of them, except two, lost the primaries. David Carlucci is one of only two IDC members that survived their primaries. So a lot of Democratic voters are inclined to go against IDC members. But again, there are two factors at play, really. The first being what I already said, which is that, he won in the district anyway. He doesn't need to win 55, 60% of the vote. He doesn't need to win 51% of the vote. He needs probably around 20% of the vote to be able to win, or hypothetically could win with that margin, right? And the other factor is, are people associating him with the IDC? Maybe people don't identify him with the IDC. And you could see, if you start to notice the coverage and the press releases of his opponents and the other candidates in the race, they really emphasized his role in the IDC in recent weeks. And that's probably an indication that they've seen that he is a front runner and that maybe voters aren't associating him as a member of the IDC. So they'll mention IDC. They'll say that he's a rogue, for example. I've seen that used, and that kind of stuff.
I like that term, rogue.
But that's I think
that's what they were. Yeah,
that's the argument, particularly when you're talking about a Democratic Party primary. This is a party primary, and even though just to answer your last question, which was did I think that it's reliably blue? I don't think there's any doubt about it, particularly in a presidential year. I don't think the backlash against the Democratic establishment from anything I've seen is going to be anything less than that district will go blue for the presidential candidate, and no indication that it wouldn't go blue for the Democrat in the congressional race as well.
The IDC, to most voters around New York State and in the area here in Westchester, that was, as you pointed out, a couple of years ago, 2018, and they were together for a few years before that. They kind of got kicked out of office, most of them, a couple of years ago. Do most voters even remember the IDC now, what this was all about, or is it ancient history, or it's kind of like if you're into politics, yeah, if you're not that into it, kind of vote along party lines, not so much?
Yeah, I think that, when you talk about someone that maybe doesn't follow it
too closely.
Yes. I mean, they may not have a warm and fuzzy feeling about the IDC, but I don't think that they can map out who the IDC was, who the members were. And, certainly in previous primary campaigns, the former members were really hammered as being part of that. But again, I don't know that Carlucci, and remember something here, John, Carlucci is not the incumbent. So it's not that when you say that the other opponents are running just against David Carlucci, they're running against 6, 7 other people. So it's not that all of their energy has been focused on what they call in campaigning defining Carlucci as a member of that offshoot group of Democrats. It's really been a matter of even just getting their name recognition and establishing who they are and what their platform is.
Okay, so might I be accurate if I say that many people might not remember the IDC too well, but we do because you and I obsess over this kind of stuff?
Again, tough for me to say. I think that if you mention the IDC, people that follow may say, yes, I remember that, but they may not be able to tell you who the members are or say that they identify particular people with it or without it.
Right, but you and I obsess over this, so that's why we remember things like IDC.
Yeah, I mean, do most people even know what IDC is? I don't know.
Yeah,
but then again, when you're talking about people that are voting in a June 23rd primary election, in the Democratic Party primary for Congress, those are typically going to be the type of people that would know what the IDC is.
Yeah, I've heard I obsess over this stuff, but you'd have to back me up and say, no, I don't, right? Oh, well, you would probably say the same thing, too. We both do, right? That's why we do this.
Sure, yeah.
We kind of obsess over these kind of things, right?
That could be our new ad. We obsess over it so you don't have to.
I like that. Mark Lungariello, Journal News Investigative Reporter, Journal News, LoHud.com, on the beat in Westchester. Mark, we thank you for keeping us up to date on the beat in Westchester. Let's talk again real soon.
My pleasure, John. And by the way, I love the facial hair, the quarantine.
Well, thank you. I did it as a kind of a lockdown thing, so as a lot of people did. Hadn't had a beard in over 30 years, wanted to see what it looked like all these years later. I think this was the chance, the opportunity to do that. Don't obsess over this stuff now that we talked about it. Okay, Mark? I promise not to. Do I keep my promises? Well, maybe not. We at Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com, produced by Shark Creative, are made possible by our good friends at Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center in Buchanan, where they promise to keep the lights on throughout Westchester and beyond right through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric in Pelham and Westchester, up in Pauling in Dutchess County and Manhattan. With Lipolis, you are never left in the dark. We salute our heroes at White Plains Hospital, everybody on the front line during the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. The White Plains Hospital Center, we thank you for all that you do. By Park Sterling Realty and also by Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth into a fiduciary standard, and Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon. I'm John Marino. We are Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com, all one word. Brought to you by, produced by Shark with a C, not a K, S-H-A-R-C, Creative. Find all of our Westchester Talk Radio programming on our YouTube channel, Shark Creative, YouTube. Yes, go to our YouTube channel. Go to Shark Creative, the YouTube channel. Get it all right there.